Hi everyone, Tony Tonkin here from Wise, Witty and Weird. Glad you could be with me. I'm sorry I don't tend to post as often as I would like, but you know, there are other things that I tend to do that tend to get in the way often of posting here, and besides I've only got 20 people subscribed, so what does it matter? And I would like to say though that if you do like any of the videos that we have to offer, could you please subscribe, ring the bell, let us know what you think, make some comments. We did do a post on the Child Protection Party yesterday, which had a fantastic response on our YouTube channel. So if anybody is subscribing also to the Child Protection Party, thanks very much for that response as well. It's great to be with you, and I'm going to talk about something which I tend to have a lot of conversations around, and that's Sky News. It's actually not a channel I actually subscribe to per se in terms of their network, but I do subscribe to the YouTube channels that provide me with most of the irrelevant news that you tend to get from Sky News anyway. And so there's always something that they're saying, whether it be Murray Jones and others. There's a whole host of people that spout unbelievable crap on Sky News. And one of the things that really concerns me is that it is the Murdoch press trying to push forward an agenda, a radical right agenda, which is influencing many people, I think, as to how they should be thinking about major topics in this world. One of the things that does disturb me the most is that they're still fighting for Donald Trump, and no matter what happens at the end of the day, whether he goes to court or whether he gets locked up, they will still be anxiously supporting the insurrection, and whatever it is that Trump does, they'll be supporting his big lie. It amuses me that a group of relatively intelligent people, as I think they are, can have such skewed views of the world that they tend to report the same narrative over and over again. I'm not suggesting for a moment that I have the correct view of the world. I'm sure that I don't. I have another view of the world, and I'm grateful that YouTube at least provides us with the opportunity to be able to spout whatever it is that we want to spout, even though a lot of people may not necessarily grasp what we're saying or subscribe to this channel. And sometimes I believe that, particularly on this channel, not so much the Child Protection Party channel, but certainly here, I think I'm talking to myself, which is fine. But I just wanted to, because, you know, over time people can look back on some of these YouTube videos and they can reflect on some of the things that we've said, and maybe some of the things that have been spoken about will help other people maybe to see things just a wee bit differently, to view things differently, to confront some of the things that are happening to them and look at them in a way which is probably more refreshing and more sensible and hopefully more rational. So I'm going to show a clip of my buddy Chris Kenny talking about the coronavirus and what's been happening in New South Wales. Now, if anybody watches this from overseas, here in Australia, we've done remarkably well in managing the coronavirus. We haven't had a death in this country, I think, until recently, 18 months. We've combated the virus, we've kept people out. You know, here in South Australia where I live, the environment's pretty damn normal. I can play golf, I could do all the things that I want to do, I can go down the shop, I don't have to wear a mask. There is no COVID here in South Australia. And I guess in this country we're working towards zero COVID. Now that's probably unrealistic, but we're caught between allowing COVID to take over our country and create a vast degree of illness and probably death. And that to me seems like a reasonable goal, that politicians and people in the health industry don't want people to die. And I think that that's something that we all should hold on to, that, we should be caring for those people around us, and that if there's a breakout of the virus and our hospitals are overwhelmed and a lot of people die, well then, that's got to be something that's of great concern to all of us. But at the moment, here in Australia, we've been relatively free of the virus. There have been some lockdowns. There was a lockdown a few months ago in Victoria, and there's now a major outbreak in New South Wales, which is causing them to be locked down. They've been locked down for 2 weeks. There will be another 2 weeks probably on top of that, in which they'll be locked down. And the state borders get closed. People can't come in and out of states. We can fly to other states, but we can't certainly go to New South Wales. Or if we go to New South Wales, we can't come back, or if we come back, we have to be quarantined, and a whole lot of other stuff has to happen. So we tend to stay put. But there's a group of people who tend to believe that the lockdowns are causing more harm than they are good. And I cannot understand why it is that they think in that particular way. Because and I'll just play some clips from Chris Kenny at the moment from Sky News, who spouts what most of them say, whether it be Bolt or Murray or Alan Jones or whatever. It's the same narrative, just different voices, different faces. And I can't grasp what it is that they're actually trying to tell us. If anybody here if anybody's watching this, and eventually, if you put down a comment in relation to what you think this is about, please let me know, because I've got no bloody idea. But they seem to be saying that we should open up the country, we should accept the fact that the coronavirus is going to be with us for a while, that a certain percentage of the population, or parts of the population, over 70s, for example, the majority of them seem to be vaccinated, and there's a group of middle-aged people who are, and then there's lesser number of young people who are, because the vaccine hasn't been distributed primarily to them yet. So, and Pfizer has been an issue. So these are the problems that we have. But these guys seem to be saying that it doesn't matter where the virus is, what it's doing, whether it's the Alpha strain or the Delta strain or whatever it might be. At the end of the day, we should open up our country, let businesses do their thing, let the health system manage whatever it is that happens, that there are so few people that die from this virus anyway, that we should let it go. Now, there's some strange things happening around this virus from my understanding. Number one is the Deltas can be spread far more easily, that compared to the other viruses, it lingers in the air much longer, and it is far more transmissible. So given that we're dealing with a different virus, kind of the rules change as well. And they don't seem to understand what those rules are. If it's spreading as quickly as it is in New South Wales right at this moment, or in Sydney in particular, then if it wasn't capped, if we were not doing lockdowns, what would be the end result? And they never seem to canvass this idea. What can potentially happen as a result of just opening up and letting everything flow? To what extent will we find ourselves completely inundated with the virus, our hospitals full, and perhaps thousands of people dying? Is that a risk that we want to take? They blame the politicians, and the politicians certainly need to take responsibility for the lack of vaccine rollout and the way that's occurred in this country, given that we've been so far ahead of it over the years, over the last 18 months. And they talk about fear. Now, I think, as you'll see in this video in a moment, Chris Kenny talks about an advert that we've put out, the government's put out in relation to the vaccine, encouraging people to take the vaccine. So it's quite a horrible video, and he plays it, and it's supposed to scare people. And I think if you watch it, it does, because in reality, this is kind of what happens to people when they get the vaccine. And this particular Delta variant is more that people that are younger tend to acquire it. So here we have Chris Kenny talking about this, and I'll break it up as we go along because he spouts so much crap. Sorry folks, I'll just have to, I didn't check this before I start. I did this last time I did these dice feed. I'll just have to adjust the sound so that we can get something happening here. And we will do that, and that should bring Chris up. Maybe. So he's still spouting crap, so I won't need to worry about that. Just have to make that adjustment again. So I do apologise for anybody who might be watching. I think, Tony, you're a dick. You don't know what you're doing. And you're probably right. I should have adjusted this beforehand, but I didn't really. Still not happening. And I don't know where to fix that. You're a moron, Tony. What can I say? I know that it's in here somewhere. Here we go. Default, and we will try again.
Show in such great numbers, but I found myself in the strange situation on the weekend in Melbourne, in Freedom, deciding whether to head back to Sydney and into lockdown. Lockdowns, as you know, are miserable, damaging and soul destroying. Most of them have been unnecessary, including this one in Sydney now. But anyway, here I am. Sydney is home.
So here we're not going to get an explanation from him as to what unnecessary means, because simply the man doesn't know. He's not a medical practitioner. He's a wanker. So there's no way in the world he can ever develop any idea or suggest to us that he has somehow this omniscient knowledge about what is the best thing to do. This is so everything he says and anybody ever says on Sky News has a political background to it, it's a political agenda that they're trying to spread, and here he is doing exactly just that.
And I'm in now, and like 5 million others, I'm stuck here until governments either decide they've met their zero COVID aims or they come to their senses. The point is that this is an overreaction. We should not be locked down like this. Just as Victoria's harsh and extended lockdown was over the top last year and they faced a much more serious situation for all kinds of reasons, this is too much now as well.
The Victorian lockdown got rid of the virus. They haven't had a case of coronavirus over there for almost 2 weeks now. So they were able to get rid of it as best as is possible. Who knows whether it's wandering around the community, but there haven't been much take up of the virus. None, in fact. So the lockdown did work in Victoria. New South Wales, though, were a little bit slow. They all seem to think, a bit like Chris Kenny and his crew, that locking down was unhelpful. So they chose not to lock down. They just had restrictions in certain areas. Earlier in the year, there was a breakout at Bondi, so they tended to lock down that region, and in that instance, that worked well. The reason why it worked well was that it wasn't the Delta virus, so it wasn't spreading as rapidly as this current virus, and it wasn't affecting a lot of the younger people as this virus does. So we're playing a different game now, Chris, a completely different game. And what they have done as a result, they've decided they've had to lock down. They didn't want to. They think and act like you, the Liberal government in New South Wales, but they knew at the end of the day that if they did not lock down that state, they would be in big trouble later on. And remember, most of the decisions they make, even though they say they're about helping, they're about their health concerns and about the community, they're also about their political futures, because if they make the wrong decision, eventually they will be punished on the ballot box. We've seen it happen in WA, where they made all the right decisions and they almost wiped out the Liberal Party. There has been a time where Gladys Berejiklian has been a very popular figure in New South Wales. And my guess is that had she not done this lockdown, she would have been crucified at the elections. So eventually, if you do not do the right thing, the voters will punish you. And so that needs to be considered also in some of these decision makings.
Remember, we've demonstrated with the experts on this program that the lockdowns imposed in Adelaide, Perth twice, Brisbane twice, and Melbourne twice over the past 8 months were unnecessary. The data.
Their version of experts is a bit different from my version of experts. Sometimes I will check to figure out, once they say who this expert is, I'll find out who they are. And they're often right-wing propagandists, and they are not very smart people. Some of them, just because you have a degree doesn't necessarily mean you're smart or clever or rational or thoughtful. And one of them I know I checked had been deregistered by the medical board in the United States because his views were so outlandish that they were harmful to the people he was supposed to be treating. So their version of an expert is somewhat questionable.
Data shows that they were tiny outbreaks that were brought under control without the lockdowns actually adding to the contact tracing efforts. In Sydney, this outbreak is different. It's much more widespread. It's raced ahead of the contact tracers. But we're still talking about infections in the main. We're still frightening people rather than talking about living with a virus that we will eventually have to live with. Now, we heard the figures again today.
Now, I do need to remind Chris that we do not want to be living with a virus that at the moment, because of the low level of vaccinations, is running rampant in this country. We want to be able to live with a virus which is not going to kill us, which is not going to hospitalise us, which may appear at the end of the day, if we are vaccinated, to be no different from the common flu. But we don't want to have to live with it. And also, we don't want to have to live with the long-term outcomes that have been derived from this virus. We still don't know necessarily what those long-term outcomes are likely to be. There is some research that says that this virus does affect certain parts of our body that the common flu doesn't touch. So we need to be more circumspect about all of this rather than jumping to the types of bizarre conclusions that people like Kenny jump to.
More than 70%, nearly 3/4 of all Australians over 70 years of age have had a vaccination shot, and more than half of the over 50s. So we're in an infinitely better position than even Victoria was last year, not to mention any of the other countries.
I like the way they must celebrate Victoria, because Victoria is a Labor-held state and New South Wales is a Liberal state. So here we have the politics of it all coming into play because they hate Andrews, the Premier of Victoria, and they love Gladys because, you know, she's Liberal. So here's right and left battling against each other, apparently against a virus that doesn't give a damn which side of politics you sit on.
Who went through hell over the past 18 months. No matter what happens, we will never experience the worst of this pandemic. That's great news. With all of those over 70 who want a vaccine having one, we simply can't face the dire consequences that we've seen in other countries. Even in Victoria last year, where there were sadly 800 people who died, 80% of them were in aged care settings. These vulnerable people are now
Again, he misses the point. This is not about the elderly. This is not about the alpha virus and other viruses. This is different. He doesn't seem to get it. He's still living, unfortunately, in the past.
Vaccinated in Sydney and across the nation. This is terrific news. We've got far less to worry about. There's been one death in this Sydney outbreak, the first death in this country from a locally acquired COVID infection for the entire year. This was a 90-year-old unvaccinated woman.
I often wonder what he and his mates would be saying if there were 50 deaths or if there were 100 deaths. You know, would that kind of be okay? Would that be an acceptable level if they were young people between the ages of maybe 25 and 45? If some of them were dying, if kids were dying, would that be acceptable to these dudes? The fact that it is unlikely to happen because the vaccination rates are kicking up and that we have been so good at keeping the vaccine out of the country, you know, we are lucky in that sense that it hasn't run riot, that we have been able to control this pandemic to some extent. But if the death rate and the hospitalisations increased proportionally as they have in the United States now and as they are in the UK and Europe with this new variant, well, maybe he'd be singing a different tune. Or maybe people like Kenny would be hiding under the table and they were wondering what in the hell they can talk about next. Because they do not understand what we're facing here. And they think that they can spout this crap with no real solutions apart from let's open everything up. I often think if they were in power, what would it be like? It'd be horrific. It'd be absolutely horrific. Because they would be making decisions that aren't about the health of us. It's about their agenda, it's about money, it's about taking care of their best mates who are business people, and it's not that we don't feel for the business people either. If you're running a business and you're having to lock down all the time, I can appreciate this must be devastating to you, and I can understand that the businesses are closing. But when you look at, a business closing versus hundreds of people, maybe thousands of people dying, I'm going to settle for the businesses closing. I think we need to offer them support, and we should do so. We probably should offer more than what we do. But at the end of the day, if someone's going to die versus a business closing, I'm going for saving that person's life.
No government policy, no face mask rule, no lockdown, no vaccine rollout can protect a 90-year-old who chooses, for whatever reason, not to be vaccinated. Now, every passing is sad, but really, most people in most countries of the world would love to walk the streets of Sydney today and face the risk that exists here now. But what do our politicians do?
I don't even know what he means by that. Like who would want to? I don't want to go to Sydney, right? If you're living in South Australia, Queensland now, Western, whatever, living in any other state or territory, you're okay. It's not the virus anymore. But, because we're free. But I wouldn't want to go and live in Sydney. I don't think that if you came from another country, you'd necessarily want to go and live in Sydney at the moment either, because there is the fear of this spreading. And it spreads like wildfire, for Christ's sake, And there's a good chance that as it spreads, and they don't seem to understand that if, one person has the virus, then, likely that 10 other people may get it. And then if you allow it to spread and not do anything to mitigate against any of that, another 10 people, and exponentially, this just becomes way out of control. You'll wind up with a whole country or a whole city with this virus and hospitals overrun and people dying. And it's horrific. And the long-term effects, even though we don't know specifically what they might be, we can suspect they're going to be horrific. And the cost to society for that, in terms of medical treatment and help over the coming decades, will be astronomical. So what in the frickin' hell is he talking about?
They peddle fear. Great. So we show an actress.
I think the most hypocritical part of that is the fact that this place, Sky News, they're in the fear peddling business. This is what they do for a living. And here they are criticising the government for putting out what I think is a pretty horrific video, but does get the message across that this is what you could be suffering if you choose not to get vaccinated. And that's what a lot of people would be suffering if they chose to do what people like Chris Kenny are suggesting.
Playing a young woman extremely ill from COVID, even though young, healthy adults are extremely unlikely to get that ill.
That is crap. We don't know that. There are more young people now in hospital than there have been before. And the spread of the virus is nowhere near as rampant as what it had been. So you don't know what you're talking about, Kenny. You're talking out your ass, as you normally do.
Can, of course, just to be super clear, but it is extremely rare. And they suggest in the ad that people like that should get vaccinated, even though the under 40s are not part of the general vaccine rollout, precisely because the threat to them is so low compared to the elderly.
When we were ordering the virus and we didn't have the Delta strain, it was important that we vaccinated the elderly. I keep saying, and people like Chris Kenny are too thick to understand this, that the rules have changed because of the new variant. They don't get it. But hopefully politicians and governments therefore do, and they're doing their best to be able to mitigate against the horrible deaths that may occur if the Chris Kennys of this world were running this country. It would be an absolute disaster. Absolute disaster. And we've seen from Donald Trump what happens when the right wing get hold of politics and parliament. And these guys would be just as bad. They're just as crazy. They're just as batshit stupid. So
we have governments peddling fear when fear is the problem here, not the solution. It's fear of blood clotting from AstraZeneca, overstated by the authorities, but blamed for the death of a 72-year-old in South Australia today. It's that fear that's created strife for the vaccine rollout, and now we see silly ad campaigns hype.
I think there's a difference between creating fear and informing the public. These jerks wouldn't have, if they were in power, they wouldn't have informed the public about the health risks of AstraZeneca, no matter how remote those problems may be. They would have just motored along and said, blow that, we don't care. And they would have just vaccinated people without warning them. So I think we need to appreciate the fact that we were warned, at least, and that they didn't sweep it under the carpet. They haven't tried to minimise it. They've told us what the facts and figures were. But people like Kenny don't seem to understand any of this.
Fears about coronavirus as well. Calm resolve is what's needed here. Facts, rational approaches, and dealing with a public health challenge that will last many more years. Not panic.
This man would not know a fact or a rational response if he tripped over it. There is nothing rational about anything that this man and his cohorts say.
Fear, lockdowns and the like. Once we were going to slow the spread, remember, and flatten the curve. And that makes sense. That's a challenge we should all embrace by following advice like this.
I think the key point, and I can't be clearer than this in my public health advice if I take off the mask, I can't be clearer that there is the orders and there are what we're expecting the community to do. We absolutely need to minimise our contact with anyone. And just to stress that, even if you're going to get a coffee at a takeaway and you know that you're going to be within 1.5 metres, you need to wear a mask. This is absolutely critical at this point in time that we minimise at all our contact with anyone else. I think that is a simple message, and everyone has a role to play in achieving that outcome, because otherwise...
So Kenny is fixed on, and I'll just leave it at this because he carries on with more crap, but he's fixed on the fact that the health advice is that we need to do the 6 metres away from each other, whatever it is, 1.5 metres, and that we need to wear masks and we need to sanitise. So this is the thing. He believes that is entirely what we need to do, that there are no other reasons why which we need to take any other mitigating circumstance or mitigating issues, that is simply what we need to do. And he's wrong. He's just totally wrong. You know, I don't want to see this necessarily play out in a way whereby we let it all go, we have a laissez-faire attitude towards it, and that eventually so many people die. I'm hoping that we will never find out what that's like in Australia. We already know what it's like in other countries, and it's horrific, and we certainly don't want it to happen here. So, look, if you're watching this and you'd like to make some comments about it, please do. We'd be more than happy to hear from you. If you'd just like to subscribe, ring the old bell, let us know that you're interested in what it is that we have to say. If you've got some comments that you'd like to make, if you've got some topics that you'd like us to talk about at a later date, please also let me know, because I would love to hear from you, and we'd love to be able to have a conversation with you if at all possible. So take care, look after yourselves, be safe everybody, and looking forward to catching up with you next time on Wise, Witty and Win.